There are many factions in the country today that believes that socialism is the way forward for the country. The most extreme even go as far to suggest that one should take it a step further and embrace communism in some form or another. First of all, let me say that I do not believe that there's a single political model that is perfect. In fact, with every ideology, from the left to the right, there exist fundamental problems with all the systems in their purest form, and each has had its own examples of failure in the past. This is probably why it is impossible even today to get examples of countries that can be said to have wholeheartedly embraced a single political system 100%. Instead, most political systems tend to be concocted out of various ideas stemming from various different schools of thought, and is merely given a blanketed term to describe it from the system it most closely resembles. But that said, there are various reasons why socialism and its more extreme cousin communism are extremely bad political system choices for South Africa. Perhaps the most important is this. For socialism and communism to work effectively, one requires a very strong national identity and a discourse that can unify the people under a common vision. This is because these systems rely heavily on citizen buy-in and commitment to the ideals of the underlying ideologies in order to work effectively. Thus, it follows that these ideologies are easiest to implement in countries where your population is relatively homogeneous and tend to espouse the same cultural background, upbringing, general level of education, and way of experiencing and thinking about the world. These are all the things that South Africa is not. In fact, the exact opposite is true. Not only are we a land that is massively diverse in almost every aspect mentioned, but as we dealt with earlier, our past has become a propaganda tool for garnering political loyalty. The ANC has successfully fractured and divided South African society across so many distinct and clear cultural lines that it is very hard to actually pin down what it means to be South African to a specific cultural stereotype. In the ANC South Africa, just like it has always been under apartheid years, you are first a Xhosa, Zulu, Afrikaner, coloured, or whichever ethnic classification or subculture one wants to use, and then you are a South African. In a fragmented society such as ours, it would be impossible to gain the national drive and unity required to bring about real socialist culture, and it can only end in one very bloody and sad way. The second problem that arises from wanting to introduce these systems is that it requires very ethical and educated leaders to drive the process, since the systems in themselves are open to massive abuse due to centralization of power. One simply has to take a glance at any local newspaper to realize that our leaders have already crippled our country with corruption and a lack of leadership. It would be folly to entrust the very people that have caused so many problems for the last 2 decades with absolute power and control of all the key sectors in our country. There are too many individuals that would simply use such opportunity to enrich themselves and destroy many value-creating assets in the process. I'm not saying that the free market or private route is not open to abuse, but at least it's decentralized and abuse cannot become endemic if the system is regulated effectively. The third problem that arises from these urges is the fact that both socialism and communism require precise and effective governance to act as custodians of the nation's interest. That is not to say that capitalism does not require solid governance, but the fact of the matter remains that our government is already too inextricably incapacitated to successfully implement even the most basic of governmental policies. Cadre deployment and cronyism has left us with departments that function at the bare minimum and can't even present clean financial statements or achieve basic levels of service delivery. It would be madness to want to put even more key sectors and industries under the control of the same incapacitated leaders and departments that cannot even sort out their house in our current context. At least with well-regulated capitalism, many key sectors remain relatively productive in private hands due to competitive forces, meaning that society as a whole still functions. There is currently no evidence that a shift to more centralization would not cripple the country beyond the point of return, and this lack of trust in ability and intention would see fierce resistance to any such notion. But perhaps the biggest problem is the fact that we are living in the 21st century, and the ideological debate that certain sectors are fighting over, such as the merits of socialism and communism, are archaic both in theory and in validity. In today's globalized, technology-infused, high-paced environment, capitalism has for some time become the language of the world. In the modern world, you simply cannot not have a capitalistic element to your economy if you intend on being a serious role player on the global stage. Even countries such as China and India achieved the biggest period of growth that the world has ever seen, not through their socialistic and communistic roots, but by liberating their economies and embracing many capitalistic ideas. In the end, it comes down to the fact that one can either try and beat the world at its game, or you can choose to join it. A glance over at South Africa's latest trade deficit and the massive level of deindustrialization over the last 2 decades means that even if we wanted to, we probably cannot afford to try and beat the world by going pure socialism or communism. What South Africa needs is to stop seeing our country as a pie that needs to be divided up and shared in various elaborate ways. Instead, we need to commit and work together to find a way to grow the pie so that there's more to share and that everybody proportionally gets more since there's more to go around. The most effective political system to grow pies such as ours has unfortunately been proven time and time again to be capitalism. It is not perfect, but it's the best the world has got at the moment. Splitting hairs over the current size of a nation's pie and wasting valuable time and energy to find the most effective way to divide the current pie at the expense of competency and productivity means that the pie is only going to keep on withering away, getting ever and ever smaller. Being a handout state may keep voters loyal, but it certainly does not allow for a long-term solution to our problems. But this is exactly the thing that everyone is too scared to say to the masses. The truth is that the inequality of the past cannot be fixed in our lifetime. It's too big. The current generation of disenfranchised individuals will never rise above the current situation if there is not an emphatic drive to grow and re-industrialize the economy of this country. Anybody standing on a soapbox preaching anti-capitalism and making promises of economic freedom in our lifetime is unfortunately practicing irresponsible leadership and will only strengthen the disillusionment of the underclass, leading to a troublesome future. If we as a nation keep on resorting to highly politicized and militant trade unionism and keep on demanding that we continue to spend all our effort to try and correct the current imbalances, we will in the process drop the ball for future generations, and the cycle of poverty will never be broken. It is estimated that by 2020, China's mineral-intensive industrialization phase will be complete. This means that the artificial spike in mineral costs we have been enjoying over the last few years, that has indirectly been bankrolling so much of our handout state, would be gone, and the ANC will have to cut back on its grants since they will not be able to afford it anymore. The only way to counter this outcome is through growing our economy and educating our citizens at an unprecedented rate in order to grow vital skills in other sectors that will take the economy forward. But of course, free market growth is seen as a white invention that, according to the propaganda machine, should be feared and desperately fought off. So since there is widespread ignorance of the need for growth, and since our education is failing, and we are not growing any real other industries and skills, it means that South Africa could in 8 short years have a complete and utter meltdown. If one of our biggest sectors will be severely impaired in 8 years, it is vital that we at least double the size of our economy in that same time to absorb the impact, and perhaps be able to sustain our citizens at current levels. This in itself requires a consistent growth rate of at least 8% for that period to make it into a reality. It is a bitter pill to swallow, especially given our past and considering how much the worker class has already given to this country. But unfortunately, Labour will have to stand up one last time and put the greater good above themselves if they wish for their children to have the lives that they always dreamt about. Productivity and growth cannot be undermined much longer by politicized trade unionism and ulterior motives. We as a nation need to work harder in the next decade than we have ever worked, or there will not be much of a country left. What South Africa has is an oversupply of unskilled labor. The only thing, except our mineral resources, that we can offer the world at this stage is more abundant low-level labor than what they have in their own countries. But that is only a sellable commodity if it is also cheap. We therefore need to embrace relatively cheap labor in much the same way as both China and India did in order to industrialize and grow our economy for future generations, so that we can develop other more sophisticated and rewarding industries that we can offer the world, so that we will not have to indefinitely rely on such an inhumane differentiator as abundant, low-cost, low-level labor. Currently, we are doing the exact opposite of what we should be doing. Our politicized unions are actually artificially spiking the one differentiating factor we actually have by making our own labor too expensive for us to truly leverage on a global stage to grow the country for future generations. Our competitive advantage is being eroded away every time excessive increases are demanded and productivity is lost due to strike action.